Well, we have the opportunity now to be led by Mark Ryan in a time of question and answers. You know, if you were at L'Abri, you'd be at a lunch table or a dinner table, and there would be conversation about a question or that someone has, and then sometimes someone would give a talk, like I just did, and then there would just be any question someone wanted to ask, they can. And so Mark will facilitate that for us.
Yeah, so you've heard us say a lot of things over Friday night and Saturday morning and now Saturday afternoon. And in the spirit of the model of L'Abri and learning from the Schaeffers and learning to slow down and ask questions, we want to give you that opportunity to ask questions. And when we think of, L'Abri's style, it's not that L'Abri has a particular style, right? But what we're deeply committed to is what the Schaeffers often spoke of as honest answers to honest questions. And so that means there's no subject that's taboo, as long as it's real for you and not a trick or a trap. Another element of L'Abri in the Q&A is we're actually not experts on everything, and I'm not an expert on much at all. And so you're going to hear us say sometimes, great question, don't know. Let me look into that for you. Here are some resources. The other thing I think that's characteristic of when L'Abri engages in open conversation, open question is for you to know that we're not going to reduce you to your question. Your question in a moment is not the sum title or like, oh, they asked that. They must believe this, and they're probably thinking. We're just going to hit pause there and say that's an honest question. Let's do our best. So we've got about 20, 25 minutes. I just want to remind you that, you can ask anything in terms of clarification about any of the talks, but also you can ask anything that may or may not be related at all. This is a time for you. What I'll do, just because I know they're recording this, I'll repeat the question as best I can. That's not always, typically at L'Abri, we don't record the Q&A, but we hope that's part of the resource here. So let me just invite you, anybody who might want to lead us off. Is there a question that you'd like help with? Is there something you wish to clarify? Go ahead, Kelly. So for those who are listening in at a later time, the question from the floor has to do with how is it that we might learn self-assessment? We hear something, it's not quite right, we've offered a response, it's not well received. What keeps us from going after that?
Yes, that's such a good question, and my two thoughts are, second one is community, and the first thought is we're not seeking to grow in wisdom because it works. So the naive parts of us would say, now I have a strategy. And I hope it is pastorally helpful. But throughout the scriptures, the foolish heart, the naive heart, the scoffing heart, the broken apart heart, the crushed in spirit, these conditions of heart always view wisdom as weakness. You don't like it. In order to receive wisdom, some work of God's Spirit has to be happening. And so that's the first thing. I might think, well, it's not working. People are still telling me I'm bigoted, or someone's still telling me this, or they're lumping me in with everybody else. They're asking no question. That's because they don't have God's wisdom in this area of their life. That's why they're doing that. And they don't recognize or crave the wisdom that we're offering them. Wisdom looks foolish to them. And so we don't do it because it works. We do it because it's the heart of God. We don't do it because it will always turn out, but because if it's going to turn out, this is the way. This is God's way. And so it doesn't always work, but if it's going to work, this is the way it will happen. And so we're giving ourselves to the Lord's work in the Lord's way, which is what Schaeffer would have said. And So if I think, okay, now if I use the Sage Hope acronym, that will shield me. That's a yes and a no. Generally speaking, if you're slow, you're quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to vent, things generally go better. So yes, that will shield a lot of things. Both of the scenarios we gave have a lot of hope if those things are in place. But it doesn't mean it will guarantee a great outcome. And the second thing is, for self-assessment, we just need people. You know, the wisdom assumption in the Bible is a communal one. There's an assumption of a company, the companions of the wise. The companions of the fool suffer harm. The companions of the wise learn wisdom. And so in order to assess well, we really need wisdom companions. It doesn't mean that they're not foolish in some areas of their life or they got it all together. It's just that, like us, they're seeking the wisdom of Jesus. They want to know what he would say. And so we say, was I too hard? Was I unclear? And we need folks who say that. Like, so this example I gave, I'm no longer asking questions at the table. Jessica's hand coming right there. Now in that moment, that's my wife's hand right there under the table. But in another moment, I'm thinking about an open house for our church. This is some years ago. And we're inviting folks to give voice to things they're concerned about. And this is like the fourth open house. And I'm taking a good bit of criticism, at that point. And I start to say, and Ty and Brian, who are two elders sitting there with me, whatever they saw, they knew this was not going to be good. So as I start to respond, I think it was Brian's I feel his hand right here. Zach, let me take that one. And he just rescued me and them. Because out of fatigue and my own defensiveness, I would not have been slow or asked. I needed a teammate. And those are two thoughts.
Other questions, and I think for sake of recording, if you're okay, I might come to you with the microphone, but any other questions you'd wish to ask?
Just two questions, if I could. Number one, how does leadership in the church equip their people to move in this direction? What we've heard is a pretty tall order. All right, learning how to communicate, learning how to listen, learning how to slow down. Those are all big orders, and most of us have a long way to go with that. So how does leadership, because I think most Christians are anxious to reach out with the gospel. They want to see their family come to Christ. They want to see their neighbors, which leads to the second question is, how does the church support that kind of an effort? Two of the big barriers is the fear of rejection. I don't know what to say to these questions that somebody asked me. And if I'm not successful the first time, I probably won't do it the second time. And then how do I get from the conversation of that tension point, as Rico Tice calls it, the pain line, going from general conversation to the gospel? That stops a lot of people because we just don't know how to do it.
They're great questions that involve a whole lot. On the side of how might we encourage leaders, in just a moment I'll ask Zach to think about that in the life of Riverside and the ministry of Sage, which is attempting that. But on this question, as Rico calls it, the pain line, or just our own challenge with taking that next step, the fear factor, there are many things to say, and many of those are driven by very particular experiences or disappointments. So I'm reluctant to generalize, but let me offer this thought at least, because it is real. I think one of the things that we're desperately in need of are the models, right? It may or may not be Fran and Edith. It may be other folks like a Rico Tice or like some of the pastoral staff here or leaders at ITS or whoever you're in touch with. I think one of the things that needs to happen is we need to rehabilitate apologetics and evangelism. I think so many Christians struggle with, what if I get it wrong, imagining that means I'm doing more harm, or that if I don't quite know what to say or I get my talking points switched up, I must be a bad Christian. These are very, very foreign assumptions. Jesus never treats us that way. Jesus never gives us a script to memorize and get right. This is an intriguing thing, isn't it? Choose a gospel, any gospel, put your finger on Jesus in chapter 1 and follow him through the chapters. Jesus barely ever has the same conversation. Sometimes it's withholding. Sometimes it's a story, an illustration. Sometimes it's a pointed challenge. Jesus doesn't offer us one way that you and I need to get right. Sometimes losing the argument, sometimes getting it wrong is good news. I get to learn. I get to grow. Jesus' grace I experience is sufficient, even in those moments. So I think one of the things we have to do is find those models who continue to call us forward, who continue to ask us to stretch and give an answer and risk a response, but who are gracious and who model for us how they've grown when they've failed, or who remind us that at the end of the day, we're all playing our part. It is not that there's one way to have one conversation that is what the person needs in front of us. I long for a moment where we can disconnect the more academic understanding of apologetics and return it to its New Testament form of a congregation learning in relationship with one another to point why it is they continue to hope in Jesus. When neighbors say, why do you go to church? When colleagues ask, why is it you're faithful to your spouse? Or why do you give so much time to your kids? Or how is it you're coping with that health scare? Or how do you really believe that a man rose from the dead, that there's miracles today? There's a whole range of answers. My hope is that we might learn that it's okay to get that wrong. It's okay not to know everything. The call to apologetics is not a call to omniscience. That job description's taken. There's only one all-knowing, all-competent being in the universe. It's not me. It's not you. God does not expect more from us. We don't have to become more than we are. I think there's a great grace that has to be returned to these conversations. So I would just go back and say we need those models. I don't want to hear, quite honestly, any more plane conversion stories. I got on in Dallas, and by the time I arrived in Baltimore, my aisle was saved. If that happens, praise the Lord. But that's not most of our experiences, and that can produce a pretty false standard. Most of our experiences are, I tried, I stumbled, I got through S and A and was just beginning to G and glean the heart, and we've already landed. I didn't even get to finish. But I'm trusting the Lord that someone else will pick up gleaning the heart and recognizing what we can, encouraging what's there. I think it's those models and that sense of freedom that evangelism, apologetics is actually a joy that we get to enter into. We do our best, we learn, we grow, we train, but we're not expected to have it all figured out, and we're not failed when we don't see the outcome. But in terms of leadership in the church, and that was another part of the question, how do we promote this? How do we encourage this? What does it look like, for example, at Riverside, and what are we hoping with Sage?
Yeah, in terms of a church setting, it takes time. It's a slow business to cultivate a culture in a church. And so it's going to take a while. And the first thing that has to happen is teaching. And so, and teaching the thing, so like we're doing here. And, but also the way of it begins to be part of things. And so the way a preacher preaches, the way a Bible study teacher teaches, the way a small group leader leads, as they are slowing down, asking questions, cleaning the heart, all these things, as they assume that other than Christian people might be listening, or that those they serve are encountering other than Christian people, that assumption has to start with training, just teaching it from the Scriptures. And then, secondly, it becomes part of the vision of the church. And so it's in the language that you hear every Sunday when you come. It's a part of the way things are presented on a website. It's the way things are written in bulletins and stuff like this. And then thirdly, it's a set of rehearsed commitments. Every time leaders meet, they rehearse these commitments, and one of them is reminding themselves of being wise toward outsiders, as Paul says, making the best use of the time, always gracious, answering each one accordingly, and we rehearsing that regularly, and so that in those three ways, over time, all the talk is about this, includes this posture. And then having some ways to model it, the Bible studies, house groups, etc., the way preaching we've said. But then those who whose gift sets could help us, we encourage and equip them to help us. They lead us. And so in our church, there's a Wednesday night time where 20-somethings come to our home. Mark and Terry have this happening in their home. 20-somethings, all of them deconstructing their faith, come to our home. We eat dinner together, and then we go into the living room there from the kitchen, and then we talk. And the truth of it is, we look forward to that every week. Sometimes it's very heavy, but mostly Jessica and I are listening, and mostly we're just trying to be human beings with fellow human beings who've gone through stuff. And that gives a way for answers to emerge. And, or we have, like at our church, sage conversations. There's going to be some folks in your church who have some gifts in this kind of area. And you take a difficult subject, Jesus and sexuality, and Jesus and politics, whatever it is, and those folks, they have 12 or 14 people over to their home. They eat dinner together, and they talk about this. And then they all go home, they come back the next morning, they eat breakfast together, and then they talk about this. And those kinds of folks help model how you can do this. And then somebody may feel like they don't know if they could ever do that, but they volunteer to make the meal. They make the dinner or the breakfast for that event, and they're there. And someone staples and puts together the little workbook we're going to use to look at Jesus' words and grapple with them. And somebody's babysitting. It's like just a team event with everybody using their own gifts in that way. And I think a final thought about that is the humanity of it all. We're just human beings in God's world looking at the same stuff and trying to make sense of it. And we recently, the dear group of folks in our home Wednesday nights, it was a very full day, and we didn't even realize our laundry was just all out over the couch, right? My underwear, Jessica's underwear, like Noah's underwear, like it's just all right there on the couch. And we don't even realize that until the first folks arrive. And then I'm like, oh, well, there we are, and a little bit later I make a joke about it out of nervous insecurity. And I say, there we are with our our laundry just all right there. And that group of young people, young to me, they're in their late 20s and early 30s, that group of young people got very serious with Jessica and I. And they said this is part of why we come. It's because your laundry is on the couch. And the laundry is on the couch at our house too. This house feels like an ordinary house. And that was an education for me. The authenticity of it, just being human. And so slowly in community with each person's gifts in a context of teaching, and then some slow opportunities to try it. Yeah.
Great question. Other questions? Got time for a couple more, yeah.
Yeah, I think a particular challenge for those of us with young children and opening our homes to neighbors and people with, extremely worldly ideas is how do we guard and protect our children from the influence of culture while also preparing them to be engaged with culture as independent adults in the future.
Yeah, that's a great question, a pressing question. I will say a couple things, and I'm sure Zach will add, as he's right in it now with a very young child at home again and grandchildren as well. I would get at it this way. If we're honest, we can't protect them from the culture. We're kidding ourselves if we think that we can turn off the TV, ban the tablet, dispense with the iPhone, not let them go to the mall. Yes, the culture's out there. We're part of it. We bring it into the home as much as anyone else. Also, it's not all bad, but there are certainly parts that are. How I think about this with relation to my kids has been, we're really training them, right? So, if you want to swim the English Channel, you better learn your strokes in the pool, right? How is it that we can, with deliberateness and appropriateness in measure, expose our kids to the culture and talk with them and help them think about the bits that are harmful or toxic or at odds with God's word, rather than run and hide? And that's not what you're suggesting, obviously, but that mentality of separation, withdrawal, there's a naivety there. I think we just need to confront the reality that Jesus, in a very deliberate way, has left us as believers in this world to bear witness to him. And part of what that means is training our children to discern. So, for example, in one area, we've talked a little bit on and off about film and literature, the arts, right? We've had to say to our kids, we'll watch that together. Let's pause here. What did you notice about that? And my kids, they probably roll their eyes a little bit now. We talk about structure and direction. Now, structurally, what's good and right and proper in terms of God's order and God's world, where is it misdirected? Where is it co-opted? So very few things are all good or all bad. Sin is parasitic on created goodness, right? It doesn't actually have its own existence. It's parasitic. So in culture, where do we locate what is good and true and noble, and then which ways are it distorted? So we have those conversations in age-appropriate ways, and we encourage our kids that if they want to see a film or read a book, come to us, let's ask, we'll talk about it. Sometimes there are things that are for the age-appropriate, actually not yet or not now. I don't think you can process what that's all about. I'm not sure you'll fully be able to benefit from what that's about. We try not to make no the first word, but there are times to say no as a parent. What we're most interested in is the process of discernment and teaching our kids skills so that they're able to, when we're not in the room and we're not around, they can make choices on some basis. I think for many of us, we're kind of recovering helicopter parents, right? We have this thing, it's the danger of safety. We've made safety of our kids an ultimate good. It's not ultimate. It's important. We have parental responsibility. I want them to be safe from harm and evil, but I want them to be safe so that they can be salt and light in the world, so that they'll come to depend on God, so that they can be functioning young people and adults. Safety is not ultimate, right? It's a proximate value. There are higher ultimate ends: love of God, love of neighbor. So safety in our home. I got a kid now with a broken thumb from skateboarding, right? We've had some fascinating conversations around that. And the decision is, do we let him skateboard again? And for us, the question was, he had his helmet on, so he didn't kind of crack his noggin. That's a win. He had his elbow pads and knee pads on. No major structural damage. That's a win. We didn't realize about the thumb. That's a loss, but it's within the realm of respectable loss, right? It's a fracture. It'll heal. He's still functional. He's learned some things. You know, we haven't banned our kids from things that are potentially dangerous, from things that raise questions, from things that would lead them to think their own thoughts. Rather, we've tried to curate space where those things can be brought into gospel conversation and where they can learn a process of discernment. But it's real, and with younger kids it can be challenging. Thoughts from you, Zach?
Yep. The same assumption, this wisdom community assumption, is that while the kids are with us, that's where they learn. They learn from us how to discern what they hear in the world, and the different kinds of neighbors they'll encounter. And so a 5-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old. So the 5-year-old is we're out at a community group thing that he does once a week, and there's one little boy that's always trying to take what our little boy has. Just comes up and tries to rip it out of our little boy's hands, you know. And on one occasion, at the same time, our little boy a little bit later had fallen, crying, and a little girl in the group comes up and brings him a little flower that she had picked on the ground, gave it to him as I'm there. And he turns away from her, you know. And so after he recovers and all that stuff, we're having a little talk about the day, right? And I say, did you notice there was a difference between this little boy and that little girl? The little boy tried to take things from you that were good, and the little girl tried to give something good to you when you were hurting. And he said, yeah. And I said, for the little boy, you know what? It's okay for you to say no. So when he comes up and wants to take what you have, it's okay for you to say, no, you cannot take that from me. And when the little girl comes up and she wants to give you something good, you get to say, thank you. Thank you for giving me something good. And then I said, are you hearing what I'm saying? He's 5. Are you hearing what I'm saying? Yes, I can say no to that boy. Well, that's part of it. That's part of it. We got a lot of years here, you know. We're like 18-year-old high school graduation party. Relatives. One of my relatives comes over and looks at some of the guests that are there and says, Zach, I think those people are gay. And I said, yeah, they are. And that relative had a real hard time with that. I tried to explain to that relative this. That gay couple has been at our house many times. We've had dinner together. Whenever we have dinner, they know we're praying people. We pray. We do dinner like we do dinner. And our high school age kids have experienced that. And we've always talked about it, like what it means to show love to people as human beings, even when we differ. And because of that, when we've talked about loving people while differing with them, it's not abstract. I mean, they've seen it. They've seen it done. And they believe it's real. And that's become very important, especially for one of our kids who's well, two of our kids didn't, walked away from God. One of them's returned. The other one's still grappling. But part of what's in their memory are these kinds of moments. So when they feel like the church this and the church that, actually what they've experienced is something counter what their friends in the culture say the church is and the church that. And to the degree that can happen, that means there's skills. So if we watch, I don't know, if we watch a show and it's a cartoon and the one character is difficult with the other character, we'll say, and our kids would roll their eyes by now, the older ones get it now. But we'd say, oh, that snail's having trouble showing love to that hamster, or whatever it is. And I wonder why. So it's just little things like that. It's Deuteronomy 6. When we're walking on the road, when we're lying down, when we're standing at work, where the community is continually teaching the kids to discern the world around.
I'm just thinking in a room like this, some of us really love that first illustration, the little boy, the little girl. Some of us are still catching up with the second.
Yeah,
Gay people in your home, sharing meals.
yeah.
Can you just take us another step there, why you might do that and why we might risk in that area?
Yeah, because people who belong to the LGBTQIA plus community are human beings created in the image of God. And this particular aspect of their life isn't the only thing true about them. And because they're created in God's image, like any human being can be, any human being can be delightful and enjoyable and great to be around, and other human beings aren't. And so we invite folks who are enjoyable to be around, I guess, into our family. And then how else will our kids learn? Like we happen to live in a neighborhood, in a school system and all that where a number of people who are gay live. And in my own family, people who identify that way. And Paul says it this way in 2 Corinthians 5. He said, I wrote to you in my first letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. I think maybe it's verse 7 or something. You can look it up. I wrote to you in my first letter not to associate with sexually immoral people, not at all meaning the people of this world. For then you'd have to leave this world. Who am I to judge outsiders, he says. God judges outsiders. And so it's fascinating to me that Paul wrote a letter, and in the letter, he must have said, don't associate with sexually immoral people. And what's amazing to me is Paul assumed that the Christians he was writing to wouldn't need him to qualify that. He assumed they would understand that meant people who call themselves Christians. So he had to write again to clarify. I had to clarify, I didn't mean the people of this world. Those who don't know Jesus. Who am I to judge them, Paul says. And what I found in my own upbringing, a lot of our culture, we kind of get that backwards. We judge the other than Christian person for living as if they are other than Christian people. And we don't have to do that. God does that. And so it's messy. But I have to say, it's messy having straight people in your home too. Because someone's heterosexual and how they talk about and live their life doesn't mean they're very kind or easy or, so there's a lot more to say about that. I want to be very sensitive about that. But those are some thoughts, yeah.
It's about 25 to, so I think we have 5 or 10 more minutes. So if there's a couple of questions, we can pursue this line. We can go anywhere that you might want to go. You might want to know more about us, the church context, the library. Again, this time is for you, so feel free if there's a question.
Zach, I wanted to return to the situation where you said that an individual came in just like rapid fire Bible verses at you. So like in the moment, say you don't respond the same way. Say you do slow down, ask questions, glean. That's not changing anything, or that can't be, it's not being received. The other individual won't slow down.
Yeah.
Is it simply a time to say, all right, this isn't the right time to have this conversation, we're not doing this?
Yes.
How do you process that? How do you go through that situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. If you ever have the time and you just type in fool or foolish in your ESV search or whatever Bible translation you use, and then limit it, filter it just to Proverbs as a start, and then just look at every characteristic you see about the foolish heart. One of the things you'll see there is a foolish heart is like a growling lion. A foolish heart is only interested in its own opinion. A foolish heart will be hit 100 times and still will not learn. And so when you realize, remember a listening talker, when you realize you're in a situation that's not a real conversation, the person, they may not be this way in other aspects of their life, but whatever it is with this thing we're talking about, they're only interested in their own opinion. Then what we're taught to do is answer a fool according to his folly. Don't answer a fool according to his folly. And you say, well, which one? And exactly, which one? And don't answer a fool according to his folly, lest you be like him. So if I can't respond wisely, if I'm about to take on the aspects of folly that are coming at me, I need to not answer. I need to stop the conversation. I am not in a position where I can stay wise. Or answer a fool according to their folly. What is it? Lest they think something. What is that? Yeah, in essence, they'll think you agree with them. Then we do have to give an answer. A little farther on in Proverbs, it will say, leave a fool. Leave a fool, because you're not finding wisdom. There's no knowledge there. What that means is there comes a time to set a boundary. And so, yes, let's imagine I had stayed humble rather than foolish in that conversation. And we're staying in that wisdom disposition, and they're escalating and lumping us in and all that stuff. There does come a time to say, I think let's take a break. I'm going to take a break now. I care about you. It's obviously something you care about. I don't have it in me to continue talking right now, so I'm going to stop that. But we can pick this up another day, or whatever we need to do. And if that person continues on, then we'd have to do that more plainly. I'm done now. I'm going to get up now. I'm going to stand up. I'm finished with this conversation. Now, the naive portions of us think, ooh, that sounds mean. Is that even Christian? And wisdom says, yeah, that's just how you have to relate to a foolish heart. You have to discern when to answer and when not to, and when to set a boundary. That's what the wise do. And it's a foolish heart. When we're in that place, we depend upon naivete to keep going. We need wisdom to disrupt it. And really, it's for that person's good as well as it is ours. To stop the conversation or to not respond to that email. is really for their good as well as ours. Because this is, that proverb is about we're multiplying words. A fool multiplies words, and there's no knowledge there. So we're just at a point in the email or the text or the conversation, all we're doing is multiplying words. And there's no real conversation or understanding happening. It's time to call it quits for now. Yeah, definitely.
And perhaps just as for those who like homework, think of this conversation from Proverbs regarding how to speak to a fool. Go to Luke 10, where Jesus sends his disciples out 2 by 2, and look at the instructions he gives them. On the one hand, expecting hospitality. On the other hand, shaking the dust off. It's not once and done, but it's this process of being a wise communicator and not getting bogged down in folly. Yeah. Another question before we wrap up for our afternoon. You guys have been amazing hanging in there. This is kind of the coma time, isn't it? The lunch is settled, the sugars are dissolving, we're all starting to, the caffeine is limited. Well, let me ask a question of you. That's always the danger, right? And I ask it not knowing the outcome and not needing you to, but just to say, Ben has worked hard and others have served to set up this weekend. Could I just invite you to consider, what will you do with what you've heard? How might you take what you've been exposed to, not just from us up here, but conversations you've had together and connections in your own church life and knowledge of your own neighborhood? What of this might be helpful to you? What of this might God be calling you to lean into? And who might you do it with? Recognizing at the end of the day, the journey of wisdom, the practice of hospitality, is not just simply on our shoulders, but belongs to the community of God's people. It's important that I think we grasp that. But seeing no other questions, I'm going to hand back to Ben, and thank you all for letting us be here with you this weekend.